when I should have let myself go. But I couldn't have, oh no, I couldn't have. I always open my gut when I shouldn't have, oh no, I shouldn't have.
Yeah, like I was saying, it was the vision, I guess, the reason why I created this thing was to bridge that gap between mental and physical health. Just with many people along the years just ended up coming through the gym door and not doing too great, and we trained to tell them to push your knees out. Here's a barbell, put it above your head. Here's how we hinge and squat and lunge and on all that crazy stuff. Yeah, here's a little bit of nutrition in there as well. And they don't necessarily talk anything about what's going upstairs in terms of the health of somebody's mental state. Obviously, it's not our job, but at the same time, we are dealing with humans. Like a person is going to be in front of us, and we're also like irrational creatures, right? We're complicated fucking little things. So it's like if someone just comes through the door and I'm like, okay, cool, give me 5 burpees, great, now let's get on a rower and start giving it a tug, and we just neglect everything else, we're doing them a disservice. And that was my argument for years, mate. Like I thought about doing this for maybe 6 years before I ended up pulling the trigger and bought a microphone that I'm still talking into now. I was just like, fuck, we gotta do something. Like I don't really know what to do. I'm just this blonde guy from the north of England trying to help people like not end up in prison, nor doing things that would mean they don't breathe tomorrow. And yeah, it's people like yourselves that has ended up teaching me of like, oh, okay, there is a link, like legitimately, and we can actually band together to help people.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. It's funny that you say that because last year was when I first went to like a Chinese medicine appointment because my mom pushed me to. I had a sports injury at the time, and it wasn't until then where the Chinese medicine doctor was kind of explaining how they cater and take into account the whole body's condition and like what else is going on, as opposed to just symptom reduction of, oh, you've got an acne or like maybe like a skin condition, let's treat that. So it's more of like a holistic point of view. And when it comes to mental health, like the thing that strikes me the most is a lot of I think like in traditional psychology and in traditional medicine, it's very much focused on the biomedical model, which is more about around symptoms, diagnoses, and treatments. But the downside of that is that they don't take into account of, okay, well, if someone is presenting with depression or anxiety, well, what is that? That's not really captured. And so I think, yeah, just as you were saying that, it reminded me of that and how sometimes there's a lot of people that fall into the cracks because of this overemphasis on, well, what's the treatment? What's the symptom reduction? How do we get rid of this? As opposed to a bit more, I think, acceptance and yeah, just trying to understand what else is going on that's contributing to certain stuff.
It's way more of a complicated answer than when we first think, right? We think it's just going to be, here's a problem, here's the solution, let's move on. And it's like, oh fuck, there's so many more factors that come into play. And I see it on the gym floor all the time. It's just like, okay, you've got this prescription from a physiotherapist or a PT or whatever, right? And you're like, okay, you've done it, but it's not quite fixed it. You're like, yeah, because like we're a whole chain. We're just taking one thing in isolation and be like, all right, yeah, let's give it a bit of a rub or do some of these banded exercises and everything's going to be hunky-dory. It's like, that's not going to happen. We're going to have some compensation. It's going to shift. There's going to be some other things going up and down the chain. It's like, that's also going to be the case when we're dealing with psychology, right? And the problem with you guys is you work in a field that we can't see. So most people just look at it and like completely go straight over the top of it and like gloss over, right? And you're like, no, it probably means we need to spend more attention, and more time in this space because we can't see it. So we need to understand it a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. There's a lot of things that is, even if it's spoken, there's also stuff that's not being said or not being seen. So definitely a lot more complicated than that.
What are those things that are not being said?
Hmm. I guess I'm just thinking more along the lines of Asian cultural nuances where some because we there's this expect unspoken expectation where we don't talk about negative emotions, or hey, if you have a problem with someone, maybe just suck it up and don't cause trouble, don't cause conflict. So everything about negative emotions, or maybe if you have a problem, just goes against that. So when I say sometimes there are things that are not being said, it could be, well, we have to communicate in indirect ways, in subtle ways. And so there's often a lot of times where we have to make assumptions and rely on expectations to communicate. And that's one of like the biggest barriers in communication and relationship breakdown, because there's not there's no clarity, and everyone's just assuming each other's intentions, or just assuming, oh, they don't care about me because they're not fixing this conflict. And then that's where a lot of relationships break down, or they just stay dysfunctional as a result.
Where do you think that comes from of not being able to express a negative emotion?
I think it's just the way Asian cultures are, because in Western cultures there's more focus on an individual, on the individual, where you can pursue personal happiness, independence, freedom, and really work on like what makes you happy, what drives you. But in terms of Asian cultures, a lot of Asian cultures, there is this emphasis on the community and society, and everyone around you, and not to like destroy that peace or that harmony. And so there are things like, say, if my parents want me to be a doctor and I want to pursue art or something, then it's almost like your choices reflect badly on the family. There's a lot of layers among that, but
Mm.
yeah. So like in a nutshell, you kind of have to just hold it, but like the negative stuff, and go with. I've had to do a lot of work to break out of that conditioning and to really realize, you know what, it's not just because I was raised that way or the culture was that way doesn't mean I have to sort of stick with it. I can kind of figure out a different way that's more healthy and more functional and better for myself and my relationships.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful point. I quite often I find myself thinking about, we're born and we're kind of molded by all these things, right? Whether it's parents, whether it's environment, whether it's education, whatever it is, right? People are like we're surrounded by in their formative years. And it's like, well,
Mm.
how much of life now as being an adult is like things that have just kind of been pushed towards us, and we just fall into that habit of, well, this is kind of who I am. It's like, are you sure? Is this
Mm.
actually who you are, or is it just kind of like a condition, and we've been
Yeah.
conditioned to do these sort of things? And I think about it in terms of education a lot. Just happened
Oh
to
yeah. Also.
I don't know. Education wasn't the greatest of things for me. It was just like in terms of I don't want to say I was a worst student because I wasn't. It just happened. Seemed like it didn't work out in terms of we're
Mm.
supposed to learn this way. I was like, I'm not fucking getting it that way. Like, I gotta go figure out another way. I gotta go do it. I gotta go work with my hands. A little bit more of a practical learner, right?
Mm.
And I don't know whether it's the energy I put off, whether it's just dumb luck or somewhere in between, but I've managed to coach a lot of the quote unquote dysfunctional kids in terms of academia, and they've come through the gym doors, and they're usually cast out, just discarded, right? They're just like, oh, these are the kids that are going to be the
Yeah.
nobodies, and you're like, well, hold on a minute, like they're actually incredibly smart, incredibly bright.
Mm.
I had a really big privilege of coaching people living in the disability community in Auckland, and if we're going to throw a term around, a lot of these kids and a lot of these adults had pretty severe autism, right?
Mm.
Mate, I have never met more smart people in my entire life. Like, they're teaching me 99 things, and I'm like, hey, when we kind of like pick something up, how about we don't round our back like a scared cat, And they're like, oh, my back doesn't hurt as much. You're like, oh, well, there you go. Maybe maybe it's 99 to 1, you know, I've taught you one thing and then like they teach me about life
Yeah,
and astrophysics and all this crazy stuff, right? And it's like, well, you couldn't learn in a classroom environment.
yeah, totally.
doesn't
I totally
doesn't
get
mean you're
that.
not smart, right? And it's similar as like,
Yeah,
well, just because like we had to kind of act in a certain way in a certain environment with certain people doesn't necessarily mean that we could be a bad person, you know?
yeah, for sure. I totally agree with you. I think the whole education system is very flawed in a way, especially if you think about it's not in line with media, social media, and all the things that we can learn about now for free on the internet. And not to mention like it just if you really think about the education system, it doesn't actually teach us anything that's important for ourselves as to grow up as an adult and to like how do we pay taxes, how do we maintain our mental health, how do we speak up, how do we tell stories, how do we like all of those important things are just not in there. So yeah, like it sucks how it molds every single child into maybe even thinking, oh, if I'm not good at math then I'm not good enough for anything. It's just so flawed,
Yeah.
but what can we do?
What do we do?
Health education. And I think to not take crap from people or when people tell you that you're not good enough, don't believe them, not even for a second, because what is their opinion based on? Like, I think everyone has different opinions and perceptions and interpretations of the world that just because someone gives you a label doesn't mean you automatically are that. So it's very important to question.
How did you fall on this path?
How did I get to where I'm at now, you mean?
Yeah.
I basically started because I was really curious about myself. So long story short, I bounced between Hong Kong and Sydney growing up, lived half my life in both cities. And so I was always wondering why didn't I belong when I was in one city and when I was in another, why did I want to go back to the other one?
Yeah.
So it really just started off as I wanted to understand what was wrong with me and how to help myself. And yeah, and then I think it turned to this really beautiful journey of self-discovery and really realizing that wow, there's a lot of things that contribute to why we do what we do. And yeah, it's been a very beautiful journey and also very hard, but lots of reframes, lots of challenges. And I think the negative downsides of life just makes everything more worth it because you learn a lot from it.
Mm.
How about yourself? How did you come to become a coach and a speaker?
Great question. Fitness, fitness is a medium, you know, it doesn't really uh, matter what it is. Like I draw a lot of comparisons to a story like yourself, you know, not fitting in and trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. And, you know, it's like, well, if I kind of fell into the camp of if I can take the mental anguish and turn it into a physical pain, it feels a little bit better because I can kind of deal with
Mm,
it, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I also had the luxury in a way, and this is going to sound quite fucked up with what's going to come up, but it was the luxury of being in an environment which is quite violent. Like everybody is half a second away from like going to a place where there's no return.
Mm,
And that means that like your mind is always on the physical.
mm.
And it just happened to be kind of stars aligned that like it kind of worked for me. Um, and then I kind of experienced the benefit from it and just was like, all right, well, I'm sure there's somebody else out there that is going through something similar, if not worse. Um, how do we help them? And the only thing I know really is this fitness thing, is this sport thing, is this physical thing, you know? And I just started being curious through there. And I'm sure you'd have had it with yourself of we learn more from the people who try and learn from us.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, they come in asking for your advice, you know, your expertise and being able to kind of running the diagnostic of this human being in front of you and just being a little bit more open-minded, right? Holy
Yeah.
shit, like we learned so much.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing. I think, yeah, I think especially in lines of what you said, especially the ones that maybe I don't want to say annoy, but maybe ones that are a bit more tricky. Like I think that's where we learn the most because it's like, why is this so frustrating? Or why is this thing like upsetting me so much? And then when you lean in, that's where that curiosity comes and you're just like, oh, okay, so there's a link there somewhere.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, I get it.
Yeah, I find people are like frozen Play-Doh. You
What do
ever
you
had
mean frozen?
you never had Play-Doh as a kid? You know, that kind of sticky stuff
Oh
that
yes.
you make things
Yeah,
out
yeah,
of.
yeah, yeah.
I find people are like a frozen piece of Play-Doh. You know, you got to hold it in your hands a little bit. You got to nurture it. You got to warm it up. It takes a while, and then slowly you can start like beating it to like shape it and form it, and it kind of molds to your hand, right? And I'm just like, oh, every time I meet someone new, you know, we have the luxury of meeting new people, so we're always having deep conversations. So it's kind of like second nature now. I'm not gonna come in and be like, oh, what's the weather like outside your apartment? You know, I'll be like, fuck that. Like, how are you doing? Like, really, how are you doing? Fuck all the
Mm,
bullshit. Talk to me like straight. You know, and a lot of people
mm,
are uncomfortable with that, right? So you gotta warm them
yeah,
up and you've got to keep showing up as yourself. So you got to be authentic as well, right? You can't just put up this
yeah,
mask and I don't know about you, but I can't do that anyway. It's going to shine through. And
yeah,
just slowly over time, they like, oh, okay. Like they start opening up the reason why they came to therapy or joined the gym is because they got whatever, or they went through this. And you're like, right, okay, cool. So it's got nothing to do with fucking losing weight. It's got nothing to do with like, you know, trying to make a friend. It's like, what is the real thing? It's all the way into that core. And I find that we're basically like Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out where the clues are to take us to the
yeah,
real problem, right?
yeah, definitely. It's funny how a lot of people come into therapy saying, like, especially after a breakup, where they really do that self-reflection. They're like, you know what, like I really have to talk this through to someone. Like I've got so many male clients that do that, and it's just really it's very interesting. I think like girls as well, like especially after a breakup or during a breakup, it's crazy how the breakups or relationship breakdown actually makes you stop and think like, yeah, I really should talk about this, or wow, this is actually a pattern that I haven't realized before, and it's amazing.
Why do you think it's a relationship that causes that penny drop moment?
Because I think until it ends or until the relationship, like until the issue comes up in a relationship, you get so used to being in that comfort zone, or maybe you get so used to that status quo of how you communicate, how you resolve conflict, that you don't realize you should think about it more, or maybe that there's another way. And so I think until a, obviously a loved one tells you like, hey, this isn't working, or hey, like I don't want this anymore, then you're like, oh no, like this is actually something I really have to pay attention to and work on. It's not just because I grew up to communicate like this, for example, doesn't mean it necessarily works out with my partner or with a friend. And so I think you really have to zoom out of, okay, well, this is what's normal for me. What is your normal? Like how maybe my normal was like cleaning up right after I eat and cook, but my partner's normal was, he just leaves it around. And then it's like, okay, well, I don't really like this. How can we come together? So yeah, it's a good question. I think it's that moment where you realize you can't be in that same pattern anymore that makes them really reflect a lot more. And that's where the fun begins.
That is where the fun begins, right? That's where growth happens.
Yeah, for sure.
It's funny. I was having this conversation literally a couple of hours ago with a good friend that I call family. You know, I call him my older brother. We're that close, and we basically had conversations about being stuck in memories. You know, and you essentially are so stubborn, and you end up just replaying
Mm,
it, and you know there is no growth, there is no progression. You're not going anywhere. You're essentially on a treadmill. You're running up and down on the same spot, and you
mm,
almost. I know I've been guilty of this several times. You almost start believing that you were worth the shit you went through. right? And then your
Yeah.
future is now a reflection of that. It's
Yeah.
gotta be a mirror. Like you're not worth anything better. And
Yeah.
it's funny talking those things out, right? Because you're like, well, maybe I'm just one of the crazies. I'm just
Mm.
one of the few that are just mentally unstable. And you're like, no, dude, like it's quite common. Like people do think like
Yeah.
this. That's okay. You can share it. You can talk about it. But it also means you don't have to stay in it.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah, for
change. You
sure.
can evolve. You can grow. You can compromise as well, right? Like being stubborn
Yeah.
is good, but it's also it can't be the only
It's
thing.
dangerous. Yeah, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
I think especially if someone is so attached to their own view of the world that anything else they don't accept or receptive to it. It's almost like their self-worth or their confidence is so attached to that idea or that worldview that as soon as a new one comes along, that their own sense of self fractures. So yeah, being stubborn and close-minded can be very dangerous.
Their own sense of self fractures. That's a beautiful sentence.
Thank you.
Probably just broken my blonde brain. Fucking one brain cell is
Why?
just like a monkey with symbols, just going like, wait, hold on a minute. Let me just try and figure out what she's saying. But it's who do you look up to in the space? Who do you learn from? What's your philosophy based from?
Oh, there's a lot of people I look up to. Alex Hormozy, he's
Mm,
a very successful business owner in the space that creates a lot of content around business owners and life, which I really respect and looked up to. I respect Dan Koh, who's also a writer, creator on the internet that has created, I think, a seven-figure successful business, one-person business. He writes really good stuff, and his stuff has a strong impact on how I see life and business now. There's a lot of people. Who else? Ali Abdal, who's also a productivity expert. He does really good podcasts as well. And Stephen Bartlett. Stephen
mm.
Bartlett. I read his book, Diary of a CEO. Very, very good read. There were a lot of like mind blowing moments. I think, especially at the beginning of each chapter, he would have like a very beautiful short sentence, like a takeaway quote, and it really like draws you in. So I think these people just creating my own business and leaning into this space and looking up to these people and consuming their content, it's really changed me and completely like blew my mind, changed my life for the better. What about yourself?
Fuck, that's beautiful to hear, mate.
Sorry.
That's beautiful to hear, mate.
Thank you. What
I
about you?
look, I look up to many people. I think everybody you come across is something to learn from, you know. Whatever,
Yeah.
whatever fucking God you believe in, whether you do or you don't, it doesn't really matter. Like, things happen for a reason,
Yeah.
and even if they fucking don't, you could make it so.
Mm.
There is something in front of you that you could end up learning. It's just you've got to dig for it sometimes. And
Always. Yeah.
like the places that I've spent the least time in, the people that I've classed with the most, I've probably learned the most from because
Mm.
they've been a reflection of like who I am or who I was and who I've shown up as.
Mm.
And whether it's been instantaneous or whether it's taken years of like just scribbling down, writing poems, putting a fucking cover on it and sticking it out there for the world or whatever, I end up looking back of like, oh, it's because I showed up like this. And that was because of that. And then you kind of look at a picture or you read something or you think about how you were and you're like, oh, I don't recognize that person anymore. And you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, well,
I
that
feel that.
catalyst, that person, that place, that thing that you were doing, that was the catalyst. So you learn from
Yeah,
it. So
for
you
sure.
you almost have to like pay homage and respect to everybody.
Yeah.
Like the acknowledgements I did on the last book I just sent out, right? The acknowledgements that I did was essentially gave acknowledgement to everybody I've ever met because of that thought process.
I
Of
love
like,
that. That's beautiful.
you know, we're all products of our environment, but we're all been shaped by everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I don't remember who said this. It could be one of the people that I look up to in their books or content, but there was a quote where it says, it's hard to regret the experiences or the quote unquote mistakes that I've made because they've led me to who I am and
Yeah.
where I am at today. And so if you were to go back in time, if you can, to remove those mistakes, you basically be removing who you are as a person today.
Yeah.
So I think that mindset really just helped change everything for the better. And especially in the hard times as well, where you're going through the hardest times and you're feeling the lowest at your rock bottom even. And I think that's what got me through those
Yeah.
times.
I got 3 questions.
Yeah.
What's the greatest piece of life advice you've ever received?
Mm. I think I'm going to go with this one. Don't beat up your past self for not knowing what you know now. Because I I used to be, and I can still be quite critical of myself and blame myself a lot. Comes with being Asian, I guess. But I think at the same time, when I was at my rock bottom and at my lowest, there tends to be a lot of inner dialogue of, you should have done better, or this could have been better if you didn't do this, or why didn't you think you're so stupid, all that stuff. And until my mentor told me that, it suddenly I had more compassion and patience for myself as opposed to beating myself up and hating myself and completely regretting everything that happened. So I think that's probably by far one of the most powerful advice I've ever gotten.
Oh, it's definitely profound.
Very.
What's the worst piece of life advice you've ever received?
Hmm. I don't know if it's life advice, but um, I remember I think being in primary school in Hong Kong, and I remember I got I think 88 on a test, and I was told that was not good enough. that's
88.
not good enough. Yeah, because everyone was getting 99s and 90s, and I don't actually think I remember it like that specific memory, but it was told, like my parents actually told me this, and I think maybe after that they told me I have a brief memory, a recollection of it, but I think that was probably the beginning of when I started to like doubt myself, or maybe just form this narrative that I wasn't good enough and that I was never going to be because I was in comparison with all of these other people who were in high 90s. That was like, just to reflect on that, I think that had a huge impact on how I saw myself. um so I mean, sorry, it's not really answering your question, it's not really advice given to me, but more feedback given to me at that time in a very strict competitive school. um yeah.
You don't need to apologize to me, mate. I'm not your man. It
I
gets
mean, I
weird.
wasn't really.
Yeah,
Was I apologizing? I don't think.
it gets weird when you start doing all that type of stuff, right? Sorry for this, sorry for that. It's like, fuck, who cares, man? You know, it just is what it is. Like, it's I think that's a habit that people fall into, right? That people pleasing, that obsessive sorry, sorry. It's like, you're allowed to take up space, man. It's all good. Like,
Yeah.
your life is worth just as much as mine. You know, it's okay, mate. Like, we're equals here.
Thanks.
You know, whether we have a conversation, whether we're in the gym, whether we're in a fucking coffee shop or what, it doesn't matter. You know, like, um, I guess that's another thing that kind of gripped me was
Mm.
fitness is a leveler. You know, and even if we come in and sit down on your couch, or we go through something that you take people through, is like, it's also a leveler. We're all on the same journey together. Doesn't matter where we come
Mm.
from, whatever story that we have, or however severe that we think it is in our own minds. It's like, no, this is the line, and we're all standing upon it, right?
Mm.
I I hope that's where society ends up going. You know, because
As in,
as in,
sorry, go on.
no, please, like, as in, we go through this pendulum, right? big oppression for one side, and then big like, oh, you have to repent on the other. I was like, motherfucker, I wasn't alive. How am I'm supposed to repent for what? I wasn't alive. You know, I was like, how about we just draw this line, right? And we all stand on it and we all look left and right and be like, this is cool because we can work together now and we can learn from one another and we can all learn from what happened, but we can all go forward because that's where we're going. You know, we stand on the shoulders of the giants that come before us, right? And we don't fucking own this world. We rent it from our kids. You know, like that instead of just swinging side to side. And it's like, okay, cool. I don't know. I'm just too concussed, you know, blonde, Neanderthal, but I don't know. Maybe there's another way.
Yeah. No, I think, it would be great if our society is moving more towards that, helping each other up and being able to see it as a learning lesson in everything. I think that would be a really great world.
And naturally, there's going to be hierarchies because people are going to be better at this and worse at that, right? But I think overall, in terms of the balance, if we threw it all into the mix, it would be pretty straight, that line, you know? And again, I don't know how we would create that, but it just starts off with a conversation, I think, anyway.
I think, a conversation and also working on ourselves and just making sure we live up to who we want to be. I think in that sense, it's at least, well, we can't change other people, but at least we can change ourselves and try to be better in that aspect.
That age-old thing, right? How do you change the world? You change yourself.
Yes.
Love it. I got one more question though.
Yeah, shoot.
What are the 3 words you would tell your younger self?
3 words, as in like just 3 words, like not a sentence, but like a word.
Completely up to you. These are your words.
Okay. I think I'd tell myself that you got this. And probably I believe in you. I think that's what I would have loved and appreciated and needed if I would love to have back then of some sort of reassurance and belief so that I can instill that belief into myself. I mean, it's been a great journey to get to where I'm at to have that now, but I think at the same time, I would love to tell my younger self that. What about you?
Oh, 3 words. See another side.
See on the other side.
What
other side?
See another side. Yeah.
Oh, see another side.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Powerful.
Yeah.
I like it.
That's what I'd say.
I
think about them quite a lot because obviously I got to ask them, right? And for many years it's stayed the same. See another side. Maybe it'll change. Who knows? I'm open to it.
It's really simple, but it's also really powerful at the same time.
Yeah, I think you just got to understand your story, right? You really have to dive deep into where the fuck you came from to understand like the cards that are in your hand. But then you need to also figure out and come to the realization of like, no one's coming to save you.
Yeah.
You know, the way you play them is on you, man. Like, and we can't change anything, but we can change going forward.
Definitely.
And I think that's quite poetic and it's quite beautiful.
Yeah.
We can evolve.
Definitely.
Mate, thank you so much. This has literally been an honor and a privilege, mate.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually enjoyed that conversation a lot more. Wait, that came out wrong. I'm so sorry. That came out wrong. What I mean to say is that was actually a really nice conversation. So thank you.
Oh, no. You are more than welcome. We'll come back and talk some shit with a blonde guy whenever you want, mate. Appreciate
it. Sure. So I think in terms of because you've recorded this, you will be releasing as an audio. Is that right? Just confirming. Yeah. And would you be able to check in with me before you share it?
Of course, mate. No problem.